We had an enormous economic recovery, but the minds of people had been so scarred, the memories. Parents told their children. 1929 became a symbol in people's minds. I mean, if you said 1929, it was like saying 1776 or 1492. I mean, everybody knew exactly what you were talking about, and it affected stock prices in a rather remarkable way. In 1929, my dad, who was 26 years of age then, was employed as a security salesman by a local small bank, and he sold stocks and bonds, but he mostly sold stocks. And when stocks fall 48%, and you were selling them to people a few months ago, you really don't feel like going out and facing those same people. So I think my dad probably elected to do, as they say now, shelter in place, which means stay at home. And there really wasn't that much in our house. We just had a small yard. It was wintertime anyway. My dad wouldn't have been puttering around the yard anyway. And there really wasn't, television wasn't there. And he and my mother got along very well. So I was born about 9 months later. But at that time, the stock market was closed that day. I didn't notice at the time that the market was closed, but the stock market had actually recovered over 20% during that 9.5-month period or thereabouts. People did not think in the fall of 1930, they did not think they were in the Great Depression. They thought it was a recession very much like had occurred at least a dozen times, although not always when stock markets were important. But we'd had many recessions in the United States over the time, and this did not look like it was something dramatically out of the ordinary. And actually, for about 10 days after my birth, the stock market actually managed to go up all of 1 or 2% there in those 10 days. Well, from that point, the stock market went from level of 240 to 241, which was a noticeable decline because if somebody had given me $1,000 on the day I was born and I'd bought stocks with it, my $1,000 would have become $170 in less than 2 years. And that is something that none of us here ever experienced. May have had it with one stock occasionally, but in terms of having a broad range of America marked down 83% in 2 years and marked down 89% of the peak was in September 3rd, 1929, was extraordinary. And in that intervening period, less than 1 year after I was born, just slightly less than 1 year, my dad went to the bank where he worked and had his account, and of course, the bank had a sign on it closed, so he had no job. He had 2 kids at that point, and his father had a grocery store. Charlie and I both worked for my grandfather. Charlie worked there in 1940. I worked there in 1941, so we didn't know each other. But my grandfather said to my father that don't worry about your groceries, just let your bill run. One very good thing that came out of the Depression, in my view, is the FDIC. It would have been a somewhat different world, I'm sure, if the bank failures hadn't just rolled across this country with people that thought that they were savers, found out that they had nothing when they went there, and there was a sign that said closed. One of the things, as I look back on that period, and I don't think economists generally like to give it that much of a point of importance, but if we'd had the FDIC 10 years earlier, we would have had a much different experience, I believe, in the Great Depression. But if you have over 4,000 banks fail, that's 4,000 local experiences where people save and save and save and put their money away, and then someday they reach for it and it's gone. And that happens, in all 48 states, and it happens to your neighbors, and it happens to your relatives. It has to have an effect on the psyche. So the Great Depression went on, and it lasted a very long time, but it lasted a lot longer in the minds of people than it did actually in its effects. World War II came along, and on sort of an involuntary manner, we adopted Keynesianism. We started running fiscal deficits, of course, that were absolutely huge, and took our debt up to a percentage of GDP, which we've never reached before and never have reached since. It was January 4th of 1951 that the kid who was born on August 30th in 1930 had finished college before the stock market got back to where it was at that earlier time. So take the years from 1929 to 1951, took all of that time to restore in the market a price level that was equal to what it was when I was born 20 years earlier. So if you think about the fact we're enduring a few months, and we'll endure many more months, and we don't know how it comes out, and people in the 30s didn't know how it was going to come out, but they endured, persevered, prospered, and the American miracle continued. But it's interesting in that at the start of 1954, the Dow was only at about 280, and I remember 1954 because it was the best year I ever had in the stock market. The Dow went from essentially 280 or thereabouts at the start of the year to a little over 400 at the end of the year. And when it went to 400, everybody wondered, is this 1929 all over again? Senator Fulbright, he called a special investigation, and he called it the stock market study. He really was questioning whether we had built another house of cards again. In March of 1955, with the Dow at 405, assembled 20 of the best minds in the United States to testify as to whether we were going crazy again, because the market was at 400 and we'd gotten in this incredible trouble before. But that was the mindset of the country. We didn't really believe America was what it was. And my boss, when he testified, the Dow at 404, he had one line in there right toward the start in his written testimony, and he said, the stock market looks high, it is high, but it's not as high as it looks. You're looking at a market today that has produced $100 for every dollar. All you did was had to believe in America, just buy a cross-section of America. You didn't have to read the Wall Street Journal. You didn't have to look up the price of your stock. You didn't have to pay a lot of money in fees to anybody. You just had to believe that America was intact. Nothing can stop America when you get right down to it. The answer is never bet against America. It's true today as it was in 1789, and even was true during the Civil War and the depths of the Depression. We are now a better country, as well as an incredibly more wealthy country than we were in 1789. We're far from what we should be, will be, but we have gone dramatically in the right direction.